On the 11th of July 1929, crowds gathered in Gillingham Park in Gillingham, England. They were there to witness a demonstration of modern firefighting and fire rescue techniques, laid on by the town's fire brigade. It was to be a fitting climax for the town's summer fete, or so they thought. Nobody watching from the crowd imagined that the demonstration they would see that night would end up being far more real and far more deadly than they anticipated. Gillingham is an English town situated to the east of London, in a county called Kent. Like many towns and cities in this county, Gillingham has a long and rich history, which stretches back almost 1,000 years. It is named after an ancient warlord named Gillingham, which means one who shouts in Old English. He was known for leading his men into battle with a great deal of screaming and swearing. Gillingham is situated on the banks of the River Medway, close to where it flows out into the Thames estuary and the sea. Throughout its long history, this has made it of great importance as a maritime settlement. For many hundreds of years, Gillingham shared an important dockyard with its neighbouring town of Chatham. By the 1900s, this had become a naval base where submarines and other military vessels were built and launched during World War I. The town, in 1929, was thriving. It had been growing steadily for many years, merging with and absorbing neighbouring towns and boroughs. It had a lively social calendar, one highlight of which was the Summer Fete, held each year in Gillingham Park. The fete, proceeds of which would support a local hospital, would last for 2 days, with a range of entertainment including music, performances, food and drink. On the final day, a climactic performance would take place, courtesy of the local fire brigade. This annual tradition had grown up over several years during the 1920s and generally followed a similar pattern each year. 2 prominent local firefighters would dress up as a pantomime bride and groom, then spend the day mingling with the crowd and collecting donations. At the end of the day, the crowd would gather for a mock wedding reception, which would take place in a purpose-built structure made from wooden scaffolding and canvas. This rudimentary house was supposed to be the marital home of the newly wedded firefighters. But of course it had another purpose. It would also allow their colleagues to demonstrate their firefighting and rescue skills. With the happy couple inside, smoke bombs would be set off and torches would be lit to create a flickering light behind the canvas and give the impression that the building was on fire. The couple would cry out for help, and their colleagues would come running to carry out a spectacular pantomime rescue operation. Once they were safely removed, the whole structure would be set on fire for real, and the crowd would watch as the mock house turned into a bonfire, which would, of course, be kept safely under control by those same local firefighters. Over the years, as this tradition became more and more embellished, local youth organisations like the Naval Cadets and Sea Scouts had gotten involved and would allow some young members to stand in as wedding guests. They would join the fake bride and groom in the house and would each be rescued in turn during the demonstration. By the evening of the 11th of July 1929, the last day of the 1929 fete, everything was in place. The house that year was a 3-storey, 12-metre or 40-foot tall wooden scaffold covered with canvas and stocked with barrels of paraffin and wood chips on the ground floor to ensure that it would burn quickly and well. At around 10 p.m, 6 men, mostly firefighters in fancy dress, and 9 boys, mostly naval cadets and Sea Scouts, took their places inside. The children were between 10 and 14 years old. At around 10:15 p.m, flames shot up from the bottom of the building, quickly engulfing it. The men and boys within waved theatrically and cried out for help, entreating the audience to summon the fire brigade. Many people watching laughed and clapped, enjoying what they believed was an unusually grand and realistic firefighting demonstration. In fact, however, the flames that now engulfed the fake house were very, very real. Different people in the crowd realized that something was wrong at different times. The members of the fire brigade outside the house, poised for a mock rescue, were among the first to realize that the flames, and the cries for help, were real. They seized hoses and ladders and rushed to try and deliver people from the now blazing wooden structure. Others in the crowd only understood the reality of the situation when they saw some of those inside the scaffold jump from the upper floors. Ex-firefighter Royal Mitchell, who had been dressed as a clown for the event, leapt from the house with his clothing on fire, landed in a heap, found his feet, and ran to a nearby trough of water, plunging bodily into it to extinguish the flames that burned him. He did all of this with his wife and daughter watching in horror from the crowd. He was taken to hospital, where he survived for 30 hours before passing away the next day with his wife at his side. He died in the same hospital that the Fete had been intended to raise money for. Sea Scout Leonard Wynne, just 13 years old, had little time to react when the building caught fire. He ran to the edge of the roof and jumped, but despite this quick reaction, was unable to escape severe burns. He was found by his own father, who had raced to Gillingham Park in his car as soon as he heard what had happened. Despite being transported to hospital, Leonard would not survive. In his final hours, he complained little despite his injuries, and asked repeatedly about the fate of his fellow Sea Scouts. Fireman John Tabrett ran into the burning structure to try and rescue some of the children, but was unsuccessful and perished in the fire. Fireman Francis Cockayne was inside the house when it caught fire, and stayed long enough to pick up 2 children, one under each arm, before jumping to safety. Neither Fireman Cockayne nor the 2 boys he carried when he jumped survived. Because the fire brigade was on the scene already with firefighting equipment prepared, the flames were extinguished in just 5 minutes, but the damage was already done. 13 people had passed away in those 5 minutes, and 2 more would die of their injuries in the days which followed. The dead were 13-year-old Scout Reginald Barrett, 12-year-old Cadet David Brunning, 12-year-old Cadet Eric Cheeseman, 10-year-old Cadet Leonard Searles, 11-year-old Scout Ivor Sinden, 13-year-old Scout William Spinks, 14-year-old Robert Usher, 13-year-old Scout Leonard Wynne, 13-year-old Leslie Neal, 52-year-old Fireman Francis Cockayne, 37-year-old Fireman Royal Mitchell, 56-year-old Fireman Albert Nichols, 37-year-old Officer John Nutton, 40-year-old Fireman Arthur Tabrett, and 30-year-old Frederick Worrell. An inquest was held to determine what had gone wrong and to devise ways to prevent a similar disaster in the future. Despite extensive investigation, though, it could not be determined why the fire had started early. It was concluded that the whole basis of the demonstration had been hazardous, and that lives should not have been put at risk for this purpose in the first place. At the time, demonstrations of a similar nature were popular around the country. No such demonstration was ever held in Gillingham again, and many other similar demonstrations around the country were also cancelled as news of the disaster spread. The victims of the fire were buried in a mass ceremony on the 17th of July. Before the burial, they were carried through the streets of Gillingham in a solemn procession. Those who had some connection to the Navy were carried on gun carriages, while others were carried by fire engines adorned with the helmets of fallen firefighters. Thousands of people attended, filling the streets of Gillingham. 400 firefighters from around the country, 500 Sea Scouts, and 200 sailors took part in the procession. The disaster had a significant impact on the small community of Gillingham. The loss of so many young lives all at once was one of the greatest losses felt by the community during the interwar period. The loss would be commemorated forever in 2011, when a relative of someone lost in the fire raised funds for the restoration of the graves and the installation of a memorial. The fireman's wedding at the 1929 Gillingham Fete had been intended as a fun and spectacular demonstration of the local fire brigade's abilities. Ultimately, it cost 15 people their lives and forever changed the trajectory of dozens of families living in Gillingham. Though its impact was terrible, it remains a part of the town's long history, ensuring that those who died will not be forgotten.